All right, let's get started. Good morning. My name is Carol Fraser. I'm with the Austin Cooperative Business Association. We're so glad to have you here with us today to talk about what's next for Austin's co-op economy. So we'll move into just an overview of what's next. If we can go to the next slide. Great. So we'll let you know a little bit about the ACBA, what we're all about. We'll talk about the moment that we're in and our vision for how to move forward. We'll get into some of the findings from our recent research reports, and then we'll have a Q&A session with our fabulous panelists who are here to talk about cooperative development here in Central Texas. And then finally, we'll have some ways for you to get involved and figure out together what's next. We will be recording this event, just to let you know. All right, let's get started. So about the Austin Cooperative Business Association, next slide, please. Our mission is to build and expand the cooperative economy in Central Texas. So we've been around for quite a few years. Our organization evolved out of what was called the Austin Co-op Think Tank. Some of our panelists were involved in creating that organization. And these days we have monthly social events, we have workshops such as Co-ops 101. So we provide education and training to local folks who are interested in learning more about cooperatives. We also advocate for local support for all sorts of cooperatives, housing cooperatives in the land development code and worker cooperatives in the city budget, for example. We're working on lots of exciting things for 2021, more educational opportunities and ways to get involved. So we hope you'll get involved. Next slide, please. We want to tell you a little bit about the members that are in the ACBA. We have a whole bunch of local cooperatives who are members of the Austin Cooperative Business Association. There are worker and marketing cooperatives such as Polycot and Key Figures. There are many housing cooperatives such as College Houses and La Reunion and Gia, and many consumer cooperatives such as Wheatsville and Black Star. You've probably heard of a few, but there are probably more than you think. So check out our website to find out more about these co-ops and more. Next slide. Our member co-ops are all over the city. As you can see here, they're in many different parts of the city, and that includes the housing cooperatives, consumer cooperatives, and worker co-ops I just mentioned. There are also many credit unions, which are a type of consumer cooperative here in Austin. You can see their headquarters. Next slide. So to support our work, if you want to see more of what we're doing, events like these, you can join the Cooperation Club. If you become a monthly donor before Thanksgiving of this year, you could receive a set of these cooperation posters that you see here, which were designed by a local artist. You can see in the background of Annalisa's room there that she has one hanging on the wall. They're beautiful. They're worth $100. So you can become a donor for $5 a month. It's a pretty good deal. And it really helps support the work that we're doing and continue to do. There are also other ways to get involved. Look at the next slide. So if you go to acba.coop/get involved or follow us on social media, you can continue to find out about events like these. You can also take a more direct involvement in some of the committees that we have working on business co-op advocacy or advocacy for housing co-ops. Or you can get involved with the committee that's putting on this event, which is called the Principle 5 Education and Training Committee. Principle 5 is one of the cooperative principles. We'll get into that in a sec. So we'd love to have you get more involved in our organization and help develop the cooperative ecosystem together here in Central Texas. Next slide. So what we want to talk about here today is what we see as our current moment, culturally, politically, economically, here in Central Texas. For the past few years, we've had a booming local economy, but this prosperity has not been equally shared. We've seen deepening social and economic inequalities. We've seen increased gentrification and neighborhood churn, where local businesses are sold to new owners or replaced by other businesses with fewer community ties. And for a long while now, there has been a wave of retiring or exiting business owners who often are forced to think about selling their business to an outside investor or closing it altogether. And this can have a really big effect on the neighborhoods and communities that they serve. All of these dynamics were at play before the COVID-19 pandemic started earlier this year. Much of this dynamic is now accelerating. We're seeing increased layoffs of workers. We're seeing more business closures. Many businesses are feeling the economic uncertainty. And again, there's increased pressure to sell to outside owners or close altogether, which ultimately is resulting in a corporate consolidation and homogenization of our local economy. So we have a vision for how to move out of this moment towards something better. Next slide, please. And our vision is that together we can bounce forward from this current situation, from the economic woes caused by the pandemic and from everything that was occurring previously. To do this, we can build on Austin's strong cooperative roots. As you saw earlier, there are so many cooperative businesses here in Austin that have joined together to create our organization, Austin Cooperative Business Association. So we can build on that and we can expand cooperative ownership to more people in more parts of the city. At the same time, we can ensure the survival of legacy businesses that are near and dear to the hearts of many people in Austin and in Central Texas. And doing all of this, we'll be able to catalyze a more sustainable, equitable, and a diverse local economy. And our vision can be summed up by the image on the next slide. This image comes from Brenna Quinlan on Instagram, and it shows a bit of what I just described, our so-called normal from before the pandemic. Then we see the effect that COVID has had on our local economy and our local culture. And then we see that there's a way forward that could be better than going back to normal. We can bounce forward instead to a greener, more equitable, and more prosperous for more people, in a way that's more prosperous for more people. So this is what we're excited about building together. To support this vision, we have commissioned a couple of research projects over the past year. We obtained funding from the Cooperative Development Foundation, a national foundation devoted to increasing the power of cooperative development organizations. And we contracted researchers to look at two things. One, the potential for cooperative conversions locally and what kind of tools and resources would be necessary to make that happen. And two, the broader technical assistance landscape for not only converting businesses to cooperatives, but also helping people start new cooperatives. Both of these research reports are available on our website, acba.coop, and we invite you to take a look and learn more. Today, we're going to present the high-level findings from each of these reports. And they present an assessment of where we are now in terms of being able to support more cooperative development. And they also offer recommendations for how we can build a better and stronger cooperative development ecosystem. So we'll start out on the next slide with just some basic definitions. For those of you who might not know, on the next slide, please. Yep. What a cooperative is. And there are many different kinds, but essentially at their core, they're autonomous associations of people who join together to meet their common economic, social, or cultural needs through jointly owned and democratically controlled enterprises. So they're autonomous, independent businesses that are democratically owned and run by the people who work there or who use their services or who live in the buildings, depending on what kind of cooperative they are. And all cooperatives adhere to these 7 principles. Voluntary and open membership. Anyone is open to join who meets the qualifications for membership. Democratic control, 1 member, 1 vote. This contrasts to the more traditional model where the share of ownership that you have dictates how much say you have in the business. For the 3rd principle, members contribute to the cooperative, usually by buying their membership share. This looks different in different cooperatives, but members are expected to participate economically in the cooperative. Co-ops are independent from other businesses and other co-ops unless otherwise arranged. That means they're accountable to themselves and their members and the cooperative principles. For number 5, 6, and 7, these have a more outward-facing aspect to them. So co-ops commit to educating their own members about cooperatives and other people about the cooperative model. They're also committed to cooperating with other cooperatives, particularly economically, and growing the cooperative movement together. And finally, they're integral to their communities and they must act like it. They have a dedicated concern for community that they're in. Next slide, please. So we'll move into the history of cooperative development here in Austin. How did all of these cooperatives come about? Well, in many cases, they were founded by people who knew someone else in a cooperative already or knew a little bit about cooperatives already. So they were founded by people who converted their existing business to a cooperative, again, usually by people who already knew about the model and had access to resources to do so. They were created by expanding existing cooperatives, usually, sometimes assisted by national organizations, such as the North American Students of Cooperation, which has helped found many of the housing cooperatives here in town. And by and large, many of the cooperatives were founded out of what you could call bootstrapped or crowdfunded efforts, raising money from the community to support the development of these businesses. And the trend of cooperative development in Austin has followed largely the national trend, where many cooperative businesses were founded in the 70s. And then another wave emerged in the 90s and again in the 2000s, particularly in the wake of the economic recession in 2008 and Occupy Wall Street. So this graph shows you the national trends, but this holds true to Austin as well. So that's how people have started co-ops in the past here in Austin. How do we develop more cooperatives? Well, to really grow, we need to ensure that there are resources out there for people who maybe don't even know anyone else in a cooperative, but they're able to start one or convert their existing business to one. In short, we need to develop a cooperative growth ecosystem with all of the support services that wrap around and help people who want to start co-ops. The essential elements of such a system, as you can see here, and this is data from Project Equity and Democracy at Work Institute, we need to help members develop their own skills and capacity. Co-op members. We need to help them find financing and have financing available that's specifically tailored to cooperatives. There needs to be more trained cooperative developers who know what kinds of technical assistance to provide at what stage of business growth. There are also other important elements, such as other businesses supporting cooperatives, increased connections to markets, and collaboration on what that looks like. Changes to local policy, including procurement policies. More and more advocacy partnerships that demand support for cooperative businesses. And then, of course, there needs to be a whole ecosystem surrounding cooperative businesses that includes the creation of other values-driven businesses, B Corps, that kind of thing. Changes in attitudes and culture about where we shop and why, or where we live and why. And increased education amongst the general public about what cooperatives are and what they bring to our local economy. So those are some of the essential elements. If we think about this in a graphical form, we see that we need to support cooperative capacity, that's the green in the middle, which is you could think of as inside of each cooperative business. We also need to support the business of each cooperative to grow. And then, of course, develop the ecosystem itself. So in the course of our research, next slide, please. We found that we can visualize the necessary supports for developing a cooperative growth ecosystem this way. And we've created a resource guide, which you can find in the research report, that helps people answer some of these questions that pertain to each part of the ecosystem. So we've analyzed what resources are available to answer the question, how would I develop my co-op? We've also researched what resources are available for those wondering, how do I develop the business of my co-op, and how do I fund and finance my co-op? And finally, we examined what resources are available in terms of how do we develop together the co-op economy. So very briefly, next slide, please. Again, this is all in the research report, so you can look at it in more detail. In terms of developing co-ops themselves, there are three essential elements that are important, and we did a comparative analysis between what's available elsewhere in the country or at a national level and what's available here in Texas that's specifically tailored for people in Texas looking to do this. So first of all, democratic governance training, extremely important for understanding how to successfully run a co-op. There are resources available elsewhere, fairly limited here. Same goes for legal assistance, help with structuring and incorporating your co-op. There are a few attorneys and law clinics that can assist with that, a growing number, but still small. And software and technology, tools for collaboration. There are some tools available nationally, but we're not necessarily pooling our resources to make them widely available to those who need them. Next slide, please. In terms of developing the business of cooperatives, help with tax and accounting. There are local firms that know how cooperatives work and know what's necessary to help cooperatives with their accounting, but they are few in number as well, even at the national scale. In terms of general business training, there are more resources for this, but again, not all of them are tailored to cooperatives or even understand what a cooperative is. This is more available than some of the other resources, however, and organizations like the Texas Rural Cooperative Center, which we'll be hearing more about in a few minutes, provide a lot of the support here. In terms of funding and financing, next slide. This is also quite limited here. In terms of grants and loans, there are co-op loan funds in other parts of the country that we do not have access here necessarily. Grant funding and equity investors are also hard to come by. Government support of cooperatives through procurement policies, funds, or tax credits and incentives, also very limited. And that's the case across the country, not just here. And community resources, long-term leases for co-op spaces, which we do see elsewhere, commercial rent control, which is currently not available very much in the United States, and community land trusts also have limited extent across the country and locally, and they can be important partners for cooperative development. And finally, next slide. In terms of the cooperative ecosystem, in terms of new co-op member support, we're lucky. We do have a lot of resources in this regard, and this is why a lot of cooperatives have started in our region. There are national organizations such as the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops, and then locally we have the ACBA, there's the Texas Agricultural Cooperative Council, there's Texas Electric Cooperatives, there's the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, and many other organizations. So this is where we're strongest. But where we're lacking, especially compared to other parts of the country, are accelerators and boot camps, specific organizations that are devoted to taking a co-op from an idea to making it a full-blown thriving business. So at the national level, there's Start.coop. In other areas such as Philadelphia, they have leadership intensive institutes. Here we're relying on those national resources. And in terms of shared marketing and messaging, again, some of those kinds of campaigns and efforts exist at the national level. That's somewhere where we're pretty underdeveloped here in Central Texas. So that's the national technical assistance landscape in terms of how does Central Texas compare to other places? And having all of those resources really does make for a much more thriving and growing cooperative economy. Now we'll turn to cooperative conversion. So what is cooperative conversion? You've come to this event, you're probably wondering what exactly that means. Simply put, it's the process through which a group of stakeholders, and this could be workers, customers, suppliers, or a combination of all three, pool their resources together to buy an existing business from the traditional owner, the person or group of people who already own it. And they change the firm's ownership structure to collective ownership by the stakeholders. Next slide, please. So what are the barriers to preventing more people from converting their cooperatives? Well, there are three major barriers that our research has found. So first of all, there's a lack of information and knowledge about cooperatives as a viable organizational structure. Many folks just have never heard of a cooperative, or if they have, they're not really sure how it works. They don't have the basic knowledge to take the next step. The second biggest one is obstacle is a related capacity and skills deficit on the part of workers to function as owners and managers. Essentially, this is, you know what a co-op is, but you don't necessarily know how to run one with other people. That's like governance training and developing the co-op technical assistance that we were talking about earlier. That's what's necessary to overcome this barrier. And thirdly, there's limited access to capital, particularly capital that understands what a co-op is. So there's limited access to capital that's needed to purchase a business, to facilitate that transaction, and invest in improvements needed to maintain viability. Many banks don't necessarily understand what a cooperative is and aren't prepared to make a loan to a cooperative, not understanding how it functions differently from a more traditional kind of business. Next slide, please. So what are the tools that could help overcome these obstacles and drive more cooperative conversions? Well, we found that the number one thing is creating cooperative incubators. So cooperative incubators are organizations or entities that provide many of the cooperative development technical assistance that's needed, from idea to thriving business. And many cities across the country are pushing for the development of these kind of organizations. You can see on the right the logos of, for example, the Madison Cooperative Development Coalition in Madison, Wisconsin, and Cooperation Jackson. These are just two entities that act as cooperative incubators, providing all the support services needed. And there are efforts going on in all parts of the country to create such incubators. Cleveland, Ohio, where the Evergreen Cooperatives are, Berkeley, Oakland, Santa Clara, California, and even New York City through their Worker Cooperative Development Initiative, which is funding cooperative development to the tune of millions of dollars per year. So the cooperative incubators, they also employ other strategies to leverage the resources they have and increase cooperative development. They work with universities on research partnerships. So the Center for Cooperatives at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. They do research and they also support cooperative development. They work closely with MCDC. Institutional partnerships leverage the power of major institutions like hospitals and school systems to scale up the market share of cooperative firms. They make direct connections between institutional partners and cooperatives who can supply them with goods and services. There's a lot of cultural work that's going on around promoting the value of cooperation. And then there are many specific funds, such as shared capital, that provide the exact kind of capital that cooperatives need. They understand what co-ops are. They raise money from people who support cooperative development, and they invest in their community and lease out spaces to cooperatives specifically. So all of these tools, when they're working together, can really address a lot of those obstacles in terms of raising the profile of cooperatives, providing more information about them, providing more training, and providing that all-important access to capital. Next slide, please. So through our research, we found that there's a really big opportunity in Austin for there to be more cooperative businesses, specifically formed through conversion. And what we did is we looked at the number of businesses that met what the International Cooperative Association describes as being the most suitable for cooperative conversion. So these are businesses that have been open for 25 years or more. This means they have a solid business model, they're embedded in the community or the economic sector they're operating in, and that also that the owners of the businesses are probably thinking about retiring. There are also businesses that have between 20 and 80 employees. More or fewer than that can make conversion a little more difficult, so this is kind of a sweet spot. And also they have 10 or fewer related entities, i.e. locations or connected sub-businesses. So looking at that basic data alone, our researchers found that there are over 650 businesses in Austin that meet this criteria. And that represents, in terms of their current employees, over 25,000 people who could become worker owners if those businesses converted to worker co-ops. And these businesses are in industries such as home health care, childcare, residential care, groceries, selling groceries, manufacturing food. And they're also in other industries such as solar installation, engineering, electrical services, architectural services, landscaping, and light manufacturing. So the potential for cooperative conversion is great, but so are the challenges. And we'll get into discussion about what's needed to take the local economy to the next step in terms of cooperative conversions. Next slide, please. Just to provide a little more context on what a cooperative conversion would entail for those interested, here's an overview of the basic process. So it's not something that can happen overnight. It does take some time, and it does take some money in terms of getting formalized assistance. So the quickest timeline for converting a business to cooperative is about a year to 18 months. And that's taking it from this exploratory phase, I'm thinking about converting my business, or we're talking amongst ourselves about working with the owner to convert our business, assessing the situation, figuring out what the structure of the transaction of the sale will be. Just doing those two steps can take 3 to 15 months or 18 months. Completing the actual transaction could take another 3 to 6 months. And finally, the conversion's not over once the deal is transacted, once the business is sold. There's ongoing support that's needed, and that can take months or even years as the cooperative gets off the ground. Next slide, please. So our research projects have yielded some really interesting insights into what our existing technical assistance landscape is and what the potential for cooperative conversion here is in Austin. Our researchers have found that together, in order to take our economy to the next step, we'll need to do the following. We'll need to build cooperative development infrastructure. This includes creating a local cooperative incubator that has all of those technical assistance services. We'll need to cultivate a broader network of technical assistance providers beyond those who are already participating. And that'll also look like exploring partnerships with local community land trusts that could support both housing and commercial cooperatives. We'll also need to improve access to capital. This will look like working with credit unions to help overcome the capital access barriers currently faced by cooperatives. We'll need to facilitate the development of a Texas-focused cooperative loan fund. And we'll need to advocate for incorporating property tax credit schemes that promote cooperative conversion. So for businesses that convert, perhaps there's a special tax exemption or reimbursement. Next slide, please. We'll also need to bolster the support of cooperatives from local governments. So this looks like advocating for changes to local government procurement policies, including the scoring that they use for contracts that reflect the benefits that cooperatives provide: increased wages, the potential to build wealth amongst more people in the community, and the increased economic resilience of cooperative firms. And finally, we'll need to focus together on building community wealth. And this looks like supporting the development of cooperatives as anchor businesses in gentrifying neighborhoods and in communities that are usually left out of economic development conversations. So that's an overview of our research reports. Again, I really invite you to dig in deeper and find our research reports on our website for more details about the cooperative development landscape. And now we'll turn to our panelists who are here today. Next slide, please. I'll give a quick introduction to each of the panelists. And then we'll have some questions that I'll ask each of them in turn, and then we'll open it up to Q&A from the audience. So as we're discussing, feel free to type your questions in the chat and we'll get to them later. All right. So thank you so much for being here today, wonderful panelists. We have Annalise Lotman of the Texas Rural Cooperative Center, Asada Richards of Sankofa Research Institute and the Emancipation Economic Development Council. We have Ryan Nill of Cooperative Housing Expansion of Austin, CHIA, and Andy Shively of Key Figures. I'm going to give a brief bio for each of you and then we'll dive in. So Annalise Lotman of the Texas Rural Cooperative Center focuses on entrepreneurship as a catalyzing force for economic growth. Annalise will speak about currently available resources for cooperative development in Texas and free training and coaching opportunities. As a cooperative development specialist, Annalise has over 15 years of experience working with cooperatives and small businesses. She provides expert assistance in co-op startup and business services to a wide range of clients. And Annalise holds a BA from Sarah Lawrence College in New York and a JD from the University of Texas School of Law. Asada Richards is a native of Houston, Texas, and received much of her education in East Texas in the community known as County Line. After completing her bachelor's degree from the University of Houston, she earned a master's and PhD from Pennsylvania State University in sociology with a concentration on political and community participation, research methods, and mass incarceration. Asada returned to her community of Third Ward in Houston, Texas, where she is living and working with Project Row Houses and serving as an adjunct professor at the University of Houston. As a scholar and community organizer, she is fulfilling her lifelong commitment to social change and justice. Ryan Nill works to create stable systems of wealth generation for as many people as possible, with cooperative business entrepreneurship being his primary tool. He has over a decade of experience with housing co-op management and startup, including his role as founding treasurer as La Reunion Cooperative Apartments, Austin's first intergenerational apartment cooperative. Ryan is also a financial expert and co-founded Key Figures, a worker co-op that provides financial management, tax prep, and bookkeeping services for small to medium-sized businesses, nonprofits, and co-ops. He currently manages the Community Housing Expansion of Austin's Manufactured Housing Community Cooperative Conversion Program, where he provides training and coaching to new housing co-op groups. Ryan holds a BS in Ecology, Evolution, and Behavior from UT Austin. And finally, Andy Shively is the operations manager of Key Figures. a worker-owned cooperative providing financial management, bookkeeping, and tax preparation services. Key Figures was formed in 2017 as a conversion from Andy Shively Bookkeeping. Andy has previously served as the treasurer of the Wheatsville Food Co-op Board of Directors and the president of the Austin Cooperative Business Association. She holds a Master of Science in Community Economic Development, specializing in cooperatives and credit unions from Southern New Hampshire University. So please join me in welcoming our panelists. I'm going to get started with questions for Annalise Lotman of Texas Rural Cooperative Center. Hi, Annalise.
Hello.
Thanks
I'm
for
really
being
happy
here.
to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. So could you tell us, what do you think is needed to take cooperative development to the next level in Texas? Where do we compare with other places in the country? And what would we need in Austin to make co-ops the easiest type of business to start?
Great. Thank you very much. So I, as in my work with the Rural Cooperative Center, I'm sort of filling that technical assistance provider role that Carol pointed to in the previous slides. To the extent that there's training in business skills and business planning support, startup support, and governance training going on for new cooperatives and conversions here in the state, the Texas Rural Cooperative Center is providing most of that training. And we're very small. I'm the entire Austin office, and most my colleagues are headquartered down in the Rio Grande Valley. But we haven't reached our limits yet in terms of how many people we're able to serve. We provide free services to anyone in the state who wants to start a co-op or talk about starting a co-op. Free services to anyone. So I just want to make sure you walk away with that today. If you have a co-op idea, please let me know. We provide free services. But the fact that we're not at capacity despite our very small size is kind of what I want to talk about today in terms of where we are in comparison to other parts of the country and where we need to really focus our work. Carol pointed out earlier that a lot of the co-op development, especially in the last 20 to 25 years in the Austin area in Central Texas, has really been driven by people who were already true believers in co-ops, who came to the co-op model because of its the values-based aspect of cooperation. And what we really see is that there is a very strong, very real quality of life, job satisfaction, income satisfaction, and overall community togetherness satisfaction piece of all types of co-ops, worker-owned co-ops, consumer-owned co-ops, housing co-ops. There are real quality of life benefits for people for engaging in these types of business. And in order to start to see cooperatives that are self-generating from communities who will most benefit from having higher wages, from having a safe, stable place to live, from having a job where they're treated with dignity, we need to provide, one, excellent outreach so that people know that cooperatives exist, understand the basics of the model, and know where to go for help. And two, easy, straightforward access to funding so that people who have a dream of starting a cooperatively owned business, people who want to do the work of supporting their own community and themselves by creating jobs that have a living wage and democratic autonomous engagement, have the opportunity to do that by accessing investment from the community. So what we have right now, I think, is a mismatch of dollars. There's a lot of funding going towards economic development and the ideas of improving the economic outlook for people who are in low wage or traditionally low skill jobs, who may be unemployed or underemployed, unhoused or underhoused. But most of that money is going to service providers. It's going to people like me who are providing training. That's good, we need people to provide training. But what co-ops give us the opportunity to do is send some of that money directly to the people who are going to benefit from the services, because they are engaged in the creation of the service that is going to assist them. And I think throwing all of our support behind that idea, the idea that we can pay people to help themselves, is what I think we most need in terms of really moving co-op development forward in Texas and really catalyzing a groundswell of enthusiasm about what co-ops can be. In terms of other places in the country, I think we see a little bit of that movement happening around the country. I think we can see it in New York, where the city is directly funding and investing in cooperative development, and Madison, Wisconsin's another great example. But I think overall in the US, the focus is still very much on proving out these models, on making sure that investors and donor organizations can have confidence that when they put money in and it goes directly to the end beneficiary and the businesses that they're starting, that money is going to be well used. And so I think, we're continuing that work here in Central Texas too, making sure that worker co-ops are well supported, or that housing co-ops are well supported and able to be successful, so that more funding and more sort of social capital and political capital can be built to encourage the support that they need to really be successful and grow. I think that's all I want to say about that.
Excellent. Well, I think that's a great start. I'm sure we'll come back to some of your points soon in a minute from questions from the audience or from other panelists. So thank you so much. So now we'll turn to Asada Richards. Thanks for being here, Asada. For a perspective outside of Austin, our neighbors and friends in Houston, Asada, could you tell us about your work founding and developing co-ops with Project Row Houses and the Sankofa Research Institute? Can you tell us about how the cooperative economy has developed in Houston in recent years and where you see it going? And what needs to happen or what resources need to be available to achieve your co-op dreams?
Thank you. And I just want to thank the wonderful hosts of this event. I think these conversations are really critical to creating a cooperative, a sector in the world we really aspire to having. And so cooperative education and engagement is a core to what has to happen for cooperatives to become a part of our local state and regional and national economies in a really decisive way. And I just want to give a shout out to Annalise. She has become my new cooperative best friend and has been tremendously helpful. And that principle of cooperation of cooperatives really is a saving grace and part of a distinct difference, the way cooperatives work cooperatively versus in competition in the capitalist market or investor-owned businesses. So I'm going to just share two quotes that I think root the work that we do in Houston. And the first is by R.G. Lord, who says, "The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house." So that's a core principle and idea that we work from. And the second one is by Albert Einstein, who said, "We cannot solve problems at the same level of thinking that created them." And so for us, cooperatives are the new tools that will allow us to challenge and dismantle the master's house. And then worker cooperatives and the cooperative business model allow us to engage that new level of thinking, those closest to the problem, and also those closest to the solution. And I think Annalise is right. I disagree with her, the reason why the money doesn't flow directly to those who most need it, because really it's about keeping the system the same. And so the people who created the problem then get the resources to solve the problems that they created, which I think is a fundamental contradiction, and it doesn't work. And so it's really not about dismantling the master's house. It's really about appeasing people who feel upset about the financial economic arrangement in the house. And until we get clear with ourselves and really be honest with ourselves that we have to give up power and give up resources to be able to create a just economy, then we're going to continue to have these conversations, right? Because Annalise, it's not about proving that communities can do it, because the people who got the resources haven't been doing it, and they've always historically gotten the resources, and their failure does not disqualify them for more resources. They just get more resources, right? So they get to fail and fail and fail again. But we've always got to prove ourselves to other people when the people who we're proving ourselves to have not proven themselves to us. So I think that's a contradiction. So moving beyond, I think, the philosophical and theoretical way we need to think about this, because I think if we don't start with a set of principles and values and theoretical paradigms, then we don't move anywhere, right? What are we trying to solve, right? And for us, cooperatives are a place-based strategy to revitalize, preserve, and protect historic African-American communities through self-determination. And that's really key, right? We're using self-determination through the cooperative model to revitalize, preserve, and protect historic African-American communities, which I am a part of. And so we've done three things. First, we started with the anchor strategy, which comes out of Cleveland, and we heard in the presentation, the evergreen cooperatives. And so we started with the anchor strategy, and we started erroneously thinking if we could convince those in power that they had an opportunity to be visionary and to create a strategy like in Cleveland that created an equitable relationship with us, then we would accelerate the cooperative model. We spent a lot of money with Democracy Collaborative. I'm not regretful. Bringing in Democracy Collaborative, working with our anchor partners, the University of Houston, Herman Memorial of the Texas Medical Center, the City of Houston and their Houston First Initiative, and Texas Southern, and even Rice University. Getting them together, talking to their peers, getting them to see a vision beyond what they were seeing as a really paternalistic relationship with the community. That led to an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, which is still a viable document that says this is what we're committed to do, and we want to have an equitable relationship, which is based in the cooperative procurement process to really seed new cooperatives with a long-term financial relationship and possibilities for growth and stabilization of those businesses. That has been a good process. It did not see the cooperatives that we thought it would, because again, the institutions were still a little resistant to this idea that a different economic relationship was what was needed. Then we went to the incubation strategy. We said, okay, we've started conversations with the institutional leaders and those who control the dispersion of resources in terms of procurement near and proximate to our community. We then decided that we needed to engage the very residents who we hope to benefit from this. But because we didn't have a lot of resources, that was always difficult. We lost the opportunity to get our residents hired on a construction job, and that changed our philosophy. We said we're no longer, and these were people who are our partners, right? We've been working with these organizations for years. And so they got money to do a revitalization project, and they did not have the commitment or the systems in place to hire the very residents we had been fighting for all these years. That made us realize we needed to shift our power position. We were still not just asking institutions for opportunities, now we were asking our partners who were looked like us, were situated with us, but again, they had a set of systems that did not allow them to live the equity that they had been talking about. So we decided to create our own construction company. First worker-owned construction company in the state of Texas that we know of, that's a cooperative, founded by a majority African-American women, current and former residents of our neighborhood, who began to say, we will create the opportunities for ourselves, because African Americans are locked out of the construction business in Houston, right? They cannot get on jobs, they can't be part of subcontracts, and so they're locked out. And so that allowed us to see how power was really situated and how these economic relationships were created and disadvantaging us. And so that construction company has been up and running since 2019. Since the economy is struggling, it works primarily in African American communities with low and modest income homeowners, and also with nonprofits who serve African Americans and low income residents. And so it's been a wonderful way that we have been able to use residents to literally revitalize their own communities. Our second incubation project was a home care business. Because again, we're trying to solve problems. We have a majority African American communities, majority female headed households with children. What sector of the economy are they operating in? So we did a needs assessment with our residents, and one of the top jobs they wanted was healthcare. So we decided again to solve problems, right? So we don't sit and think about what we're passionate about. Oh, are we passionate about groceries? You know, we don't start with passion. What we're passionate about is serving the needs of our community, and we try to create businesses where they have a access to those skills already, right? We're not asking them to go and get new training because they've been doing that their whole lives. We're not asking them to do anything other than what they're doing and creating a business around that. We have a plethora of certified nurses assistants, a flood of them in the African American and Latino community. And so we decided that would be our next cooperative business. And so we are now going through that process since the pandemic hit. We've also decided to extend the business offering to community health workers, right? Because universities get these large contracts to do these large intervention projects, and they often, hire people on those teams. Or they come to people like me as a researcher and ask me to hire people on those teams. So instead of them coming to me, now they can contract with the community care cooperative for work on those projects, high quality, $20, $25 an hour jobs, to be able to really allow our community residents to be the leaders in healthcare in their community, right? Vulnerable population, seniors and disabled, a cooperative business that elevates the living wages of those individuals, as well as Annalise said, improve the quality of life. So 2 incubations, we're going good, but to make a difference, we really need a sector, right? So our third initiative is a really what we call a solidarity economy strategy. We looked at Jackson, Mississippi. Austin used to have a cooperative, a cooperative organization, Austin, solidarity economy focus, right? About really not saying we don't just want individual cooperatives. We really want an economy and a system that supports these cooperatives, right? And so we decided to do a solidarity economy project where our goal was to identify and then incubate and accelerate 4 to 6 cooperatives. We started with an education process, understanding what is the identity, what is the function of cooperatives. We reviewed the research again that complete that needs assessment through the neighborhood and also other studies. And we were able to then identify 6 businesses, 1 a grocery store, right? Based on what the community needed, the unmet service needs. The home care business came to the top, was already working. The group decided they wanted to incubate that. A credit union, right? To be able to support residents in the neighborhood, but also provide funding to the emergent and existing new cooperatives. A childcare business, right? Because we have these African-American women working single-headed households. They have a childcare need. Again, we're trying to solve problems, right? Also, we're in a neighborhood that's being gentrified. So we're having a housing crisis. So a housing cooperative, right? Again, we're always trying to solve the problems that our community is facing so we don't have to beg people to participate, right? If we meet their needs, then there's a connection there already. And so then the final one being an incubator accelerator. The group decided they wanted to be in this business of helping and supporting cooperatives that emerge. And so that's our final, where we are right now. working on the incubation, acceleration of these 4 to 6 cooperatives. Now that we've done the engagement process, we're now going to have sessions with our residents around each of these topics, right? We're going to talk to them about the cooperative idea, and then we're going to invite them to participate in the emergence of the business. Because I think, as I close, this Solidarity Project was really for us to understand, why are African Americans excluded from the cooperative sector? What is keeping them out? And what we realize is that the way we talk about cooperatives, the resources we use, the educational materials we talk about, did not engage from a cultural standpoint the lived experiences of African Americans. So we've had to really use what we say is an African-centered approach, right? What videos we use, what materials we use, like Collective Courage from Dr. Jessica Nimhart, right? Really using and talking about cooperatives in a way that connects to the lived experiences of African Americans, which is very different than non-African American. Other people who have not been chattel slavery in this country have a different experience and relationship with the economic system. And many times when we talk about cooperatives, we don't tee that up. We don't acknowledge that. So we bring history and culture into our work so that there is a connection. And so what our group intends to do, is the thing that sings to them, is to create enough community, the creating of self-determination, the creation of really a business that really respects and has a admiration for those that it serves, right? So we can't use the same language that other people use when we talk about cooperatives. We've really had to amend how we talk about cooperatives to really address the human, the spiritual, the mental, the emotional, as well as the economic needs of community. It's not just about money. It's really about a historical oppression that people of African descent has experienced, and how do cooperatives tend to the healing, holistic approach to restore the residents of our neighborhood, as well as to revitalize and preserve our communities. So that's what we're doing in Houston, and we're happy to be part of these conversations because we know that our success is interdependent here as well, right? What happens in Houston can impact what happens in Austin, and what happens in Austin, what happens in the Valley can impact in what happens in Houston. And so I'm hoping that this conversation will lead to an emergence of a state and a regional approach to really changing our economic systems, which is really what cooperatives can do, which is really address racial and ethnic oppression and injustice in the United States. Thank you.
Asada, thank you so much for that overview of what y'all are doing. It's just so inspiring, and I love the way that you framed this conversation and what you're talking about around the values that we have and the vision that we're collectively building together around economic liberation here in Texas at large, not just Austin. So we're so grateful to have you here and as partners going forward. And hopefully, please keep the questions coming in the chat. We are taking note of them, and if you'd like to ask Asada about anything more about her work, please get your question in the chat, and we'll get back to that later. We're going to turn briefly to the topic of conversions. So we have two final panelist speakers here to speak about converting businesses to cooperatives, both housing co-ops and worker co-ops. So we'll start out with Ryan Nill, who's working on some pretty exciting housing cooperative conversion projects here in Central Texas. So Ryan, welcome. Could you tell us about your current work with cooperative housing expansion of Austin and other housing cooperative development work that's creating more housing co-ops here in Austin, and what you think is needed to accelerate housing co-op development and conversion locally?
Great, thanks. Yeah, so I am the program manager at CHIA, the Community Housing Expansion of Austin, for our manufactured housing conversion program. And so this is a really new program in Texas that stems from an affiliate relationship with a national nonprofit called Rock USA. Before we started this, CHIA was well previously a organization much like College Houses or ICC, which is a collection of housing cooperatives in kind of like federated model. But this kind of staked out a new line of business for CHIA to work with Rock USA. And so the Rock USA model involves a specific source of funding. They're a CDFI, and they get some good lending rules and kind of funding from the federal government, and they are specifically honed in on this manufactured housing community space. And just to, I'm sure y'all are familiar with like trailer parks, manufactured housing communities, but I think one of the most important reasons for this work is that manufactured housing communities are probably the most precarious type of housing tenure in the country. So like many other places with kind of a majority of low-income residents, they're at risk for displacement. A lot of these communities are, 40, 50, 60 years old, because that was when kind of the kind of big growth phase of these communities were. So that put them kind of at the edge of towns and cities when they were first developed. But many of them are now kind of like in the central kind of cities, or kind of like the suburban areas of cities. For a quick example, the first community I started working with here in town, the Asociación de Residentes North Lamar, is located at North Lamar and 183, kind of near Anderson Lane, which is, what I would kind of put kind of right at the edge of central Austin. And so yeah, they were potentially at risk of being displaced. And the problem with manufactured housing communities is, unlike renters in apartments, when you get displaced, you not only lose the space that you live in, but you potentially lose all of the investment in actually owning the manufactured home, because most people actually own the building that they live in, but they don't own the ground that they live on. So you have this kind of like split property kind of rights situation, with the landowner having the majority of the rights in this situation. So Rock USA kind of fulfills the need to preserve that type of housing for those communities. So they, like I mentioned, they have specific financing for these communities. But I think what is really important, and I think one of the takeaways that we can take here, is that they've really focused on the technical assistance piece of the project, right? They're not willing to invest their funds in a community unless there's dedicated technical assistance for the life of the loan. So that means that when they convert, they're signing up for at least 10 years of technical assistance. But real estate, you don't typically do financing on a 10-year basis. So these communities are typically refinancing for another 10, 20, 30 years. So you have communities in the Rock network that have been around for like 30 years, because that's when it got started in the 1980s in the New Hampshire area. And they've been extremely successful in growing. Over a quarter of the communities in New Hampshire are resident owned. Currently across the nation, there's 263 resident-owned manufactured housing communities. And it's a growth model that's, the pace is picking up. Like I think, last year they did 20 conversions, and the year before they did 15. So this is really, I think, one of the fastest growing models for cooperatives in the country. And someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know all the other sectors and what's going on, but I'm impressed by the growth, for its own sake. And so, yeah, so I got started doing this job here in Texas, and I'm the founding program manager. We started in March. There was a deal underway with Arnold, the community I mentioned earlier. So we closed that deal in May, and have kind of been doing a lot of the training and technical assistance for the first year. And I'm also working with a community in Pasadena, Texas, which is kind of East Houston area. So right now there's 2 communities, and we're looking to grow across the state, but mostly focusing on the San Antonio, Austin, kind of Houston triangle area. And so that's kind of like the priority areas based on the fact that we're based in Austin. And so, I think the other part of the question is kind of development for housing co-ops in general here in Austin. And this manufactured housing community thing is a very different model than what we're used to in Austin, which the majority of housing co-opers are actually college students. They live in West Campus. They get some special property tax exemptions for being an exclusively student organization, so they don't have like long tenure. And so we have this interesting situation where there are a lot of people who are kind of obligated to move on with their lives and leave the West Campus area. And there just isn't enough co-ops for like every person that leaves a student co-op to have the same experience after college. So that's something that I've been kind of working on for kind of most of my career since I left college, is kind of thinking about how to do the development. And I'd been focused on kind of financing and land use as being two of the big components. I already think I mentioned the importance of technical assistance. That's, I think, also important. But when it comes to the rest of the housing cooperative experience, like land use is a huge challenge in the city of Austin. Um, the co-ops are only legally allowed in the kind of group housing sense that you see in the college co-op world in some of the most intense zoning districts. So like these are properties that you could do like a 5-story mid-rise on. So it's very difficult to compete with the real estate developers for space for like any type of housing co-op. Um, so getting kind of like the land use um, situated appropriately for housing co-ops is a big challenge that we face. And right now there really isn't much of an avenue for it. As y'all probably know, there was a big push for a land development rewrite, which we were heavily involved in. And that just kind of whole political process just kind of ended in March for a couple of reasons. I think having to do with like legal challenges and also just occurring right when the pandemic started. It kind of fell off of people's radars. So we've done advocacy work on land use, but also we've had a working committee that for the past year has been focusing on kind of developing a system that can grow kind of similar to what I described with the rock system, and kind of focusing on investors and finding capital to purchase real estate and train residents and facilitate people moving into housing co-ops. And that's kind of at a really interesting place right now. Me and the team we're looking at incorporating soon, and getting that program off the ground. I can't say too much about it just because it's at a really kind of critical phase, but if you're interested in living in a housing co-op, um, and we can help facilitate that, we've got a housing co-op survey that I'll post in the chat when I'm done. And yeah, I think that's my time, so I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ryan. You do have so many housing co-op related projects going on, and I was just delighted to find out that there are over 260 resident-owned communities of manufactured home communities. That's amazing across the country. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing all of that detail with us. And yes, if you're interested in housing co-ops at all in Central Texas, Ryan is one of the people to be in touch with for sure. So please reach out. And finally, before we open it up to general questions, we'll turn to Andy Shively. Hi, Andy, of Key Figures.
Hello.
And Andy has a wealth of experience in cooperative development and converting her own business to a co-op. So Andy, could you tell us about what it was like to convert your business to a co-op with your employees, some of whom were also your friends, and how did you lead that process? What were some of the challenges and joys, and what resources did you use, and how long did it take? What would have made it easier? Can you tell us about the process?
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for putting this on. I'm really excited to be here today. I want to start with that. Really excited to be catching up on everybody else is working on. So we converted, our conversion was very unique. Like reflecting on these questions in advance, I just was thinking about how unique it was, and then also watching your presentation regarding the research you've done, so many of the problems that you've identified, we had in-house resources already, so they weren't an issue, but we were only able to be successful because we had those resources, right? So I want to echo the importance of all of the tools and the ecosystem building that you're talking about. So for starters, this was a planned conversion from day one. By the time I had hired a second person, I had a small bookkeeping practice that was kind of accidentally expanding through referrals. None of that was planned. And I was just kind of hiring people who I knew already through the cooperative world to help me manage this kind of growth. And from the time I hired the second person, as I brought her on board, I was talking about converting to a worker cooperative. So it was very unique in that respect, that was always kind of the plan. It was also unique in the respect that, of the 5 of us who were the formal founding members, all of us had experience in cooperatives. I was a trained cooperative developer and had once upon a time started a worker cooperative incubator. One of my colleagues had been on the board of that incubator and had also worked at a democratic workplace prior. Another one of my colleagues had gone through that incubator's programs and started another worker cooperative. A fourth one had worked at that worker cooperative. And then Ryan also had a wealth of experience from the housing cooperative world. So we came in with all of that kind of training and understanding, which I think made it really unique. So the other thing I'll say just about the fact that we had this long-standing connection, and I think this happens in businesses that are longer standing as well, versus being just such a brand new business when we converted, we had developed trust and we had a kind of set of shared understandings. And I do think that when you go into these kinds of ventures together, you do need to have a lot of trust. At one point in a meeting, I kind of said, this is like we're all getting married. Let's negotiate the prenup, let's, date for a little while, that kind of thing. And I think that relationship building is super important in these instances as well. In terms of kind of how I led the process, I can't say that I did necessarily. Aside from kind of being the first one to say, let's make this a co-op, and acknowledging very much that I had significantly different power in the relationship than everybody else did because it was my business. The conversion doesn't go through if I'm not down with that, if I'm not willing to sell. But aside from those kinds of things, we ultimately, we did it very collaboratively. We all came together. It took us about a year and a half, a little bit more than a year and a half, from when we started meeting in earnest to kind of plan the conversion to when we had our launch party under our new brand and had fully converted to a worker cooperative. And I think that's probably somewhere on the faster timeline. Some of the reasons for that are just because financing was not an issue for us. For starters, it's a very low capital intensive business that we're in. We need ourselves and our computers, and that's about it, and some working capital, but we don't need to buy equipment, that kind of thing. And so it made our capital needs very low enough that I was able to finance via sale on my own. So we did it through a note payable to me and some equity investment kind of in exchange for the business. And so we didn't have to deal with banks. We didn't have to deal with financing applications or being underwritten or any of that. And I think that if we had had to do that, that would have extended our timeline a little bit. So we worked really collaboratively. We kind of divvied up the work. We were all putting in sweat equity. We were not paying ourselves for the time that we were spending in this process. And really during that process, what we did is we really focused on big picture stuff. What are our bylaws going to be? Getting ourselves legally incorporated, selecting a new name because Andy Shively Bookkeeping was the worst name ever. Just happened because somebody wrote me a check and I needed to cash it. And getting a logo and all of that, and then negotiating the buy-sell agreement. So that was kind of the big picture stuff that we were focused on in that year and a half process while we were simultaneously still working in the business. So the business development part of it is super important, but that was kind of happening naturally as part of the business running on its own, not on its own, by us. So resources that we used that I would want to call out is there were bylaws templates specific to the state of Texas that had been developed by the UT Law Clinic in conjunction with Cooperation Texas, the now defunct cooperation incubator that had previously been here. We just started with those and then kind of went through and talked about each piece. What changes would we want to make? We added some additional cooperative principles from the Mondragon Cooperative, kind of, those kinds of things. There were also materials from the ICA group, which is a cooperative development center based out of Boston, but working nationwide and specializing really in worker ownership. And they had some really great materials. I remember particularly their paper about internal capital accounts really fundamentally shaped a lot of what we decided to do in our own bylaws and how we've handled capital. And then we worked with a lawyer, John Vincent, actually, he was on your list of resources earlier. We drafted all of our own documents. We drafted our buy-sell agreement. You know, we drafted our own bylaws and all of that, and then we gave them to him to review. And I have to really, I think that's so important to do. You can do a lot of DIY, but it's really important to have somebody with some skills to kind of look it over, some technical understanding, just to catch anything where you're going to like accidentally violate the business operating code or business organizations code, things like that. And then we worked with a graphic designer for logo development. So those were most of our outside resources, but that's because we had cooperative development in-house. We already had been educated and trained about the cooperative business model. And we, because of the line of work that we're in, we're already pretty savvy about business. We already were looking at our metrics and financial statements in our staff meetings every month. So a lot of the outside technical assistance that folks really, really need, we just got lucky and happened to have it in-house. Let's see. Oh, challenges and joys. That was the last bit. I mean, as I mentioned, it required some sweat equity from each of us, which can be a challenge. Coming up with a name was a real challenge, especially when it turned out somebody else already owned the website with the .com and would not sell it to us for a reasonable amount of money. The negotiations around the sellout or the buy-sell agreement were pretty simple, I think, and that's because I was not looking to make a profit or to exit. I was just looking to get kind of made whole for the capital I had already put in. So we didn't need to get evaluation. Again, no outside finance, so we didn't need to get evaluation. So that all was very simple, whereas it would normally have been a real challenge. And ultimately, I remain so proud of the work that we did together and the way we kind of like birthed this business as a group and where it's gone. So I'll stop there.
Andy, thank you so much. I think it's so useful to hear your story in the sense that, you know, you said you have a lot of resources already at your disposal, and for pretty much anyone else in that situation, they don't. And that's just, you know, all the more reason that we need to work together to develop these resources here so everybody else can do what you did if they are interested. So thank you so much for sharing your story. Yeah, we'll turn now to the open Q&A from the audience. So we have some questions here. Keep them coming in the chat if you're interested. I'm going to start out with a question. I think Andy or Asada, this might be best suited for you. So a lot of the information in this presentation is oriented towards the owners of businesses or kind of technical assistance providers. Do either of you have thoughts on what can help, what can people do as workers to help the co-op movement? And I'll open up to either of you.
I think the education piece is important. And I even think the reason why we're doing the solidarity economy and the engagement piece is we also want people to know why they should patronize cooperatives, right? Because once you get a cooperative going, it's really important that you have an educated consumer base or customer base or community base so they understand why their relationship with you is very distinct with their relationship with someone else. And I'll just briefly use the construction company as a perfect example, as my love collaborator goes to the kitchen in the background. You know, we deal with a lot of homeowners who have delayed repairs on their home, right? They have a lot of anxiety and concern. And so we really walk with them. We're patient. We even go to the Home Depot or the Lowe's, right, to pick out paint and, you know, and so, you know, and also because, as you know, the construction business can be very exploitive. Contractors can take advantage of customers, right? And so being able to communicate that we are a cooperative business, our number one goal is to support our residents through projects and jobs, you know, and our goal is to support our community and having and being able to stay in their neighborhood. So we want your home to be repaired. We want your rental property to be prepared, right? So I think part of what we need to do is really promote and talk about cooperatives as a value statement in general. And that connects to the workers, that connects to the consumer, as well as the stakeholders. Again, the problem though is what Einstein said, since we are structured structurally situated at one level, we're most comfortable and adapt to talking to people who are structural partners and equals. And we don't have the language, the connection, the resources to talk to workers, right? And that's why most cooperatives are consumer cooperatives, right? Because again, those are the people in the economic system with discretionary resources, disposable income. And so we need to engage those workers into the conversation about cooperatives with deep investment and conversations with them. But we need some translation. We often talk about, different languages. We need different languages based on class and based on cultural norms. And so I think when we bring in different people into the sector, then they have the ability to diversify because they have new relationships. And so I think when we just do general cooperative education in our communities in general, we do a service to the entire sector and an invitation to workers, to consumers, and to others to know what makes us different.
Awesome. Thank you. I think that leads in perfectly to another question asked by the audience. And maybe Annalise, this is for you, I'm not sure, but what actions are currently going on to promote the cultural promotion of, what actions are going on to push cultural promotion of cooperation that you're aware of in Texas?
Yeah, that might be a question for me. I think that honestly is where the Central Texas co-op movement is most challenged. I think in terms of ethnic background, it's a fairly homogenous group, not entirely certainly, but the people that are deeply involved in cooperative development. And so all those challenges that I think Asada just highlighted, are really at play in terms of outreach and spreading the message to a broad and very diverse audience with different needs and different interests. However, that is only the beginning of the answer to that question, right? Like, we don't say that and say, oh, it's hard, and then leave it there. We say, a big part of the reason that the Rural Cooperative Center is situated in the Rio Grande Valley is because its core mission is to work with Spanish-speaking people. Most of our service providers are Spanish-English bilingual. And a lot of the work that has been done in the Rio Grande Valley in terms of cooperative development really focuses on making sure that we're drawing those cultural connections between the ways that communities are already functioning together, the places and times and contexts where people are meeting up and engaging with each other, and just moving that also into the workplace, saying, you have these values in your life. What would happen to work if we moved these values into your workplace as well? Or what would happen to the idea of housing and being a renter if we moved these values into that landlord-tenant relationship or that property manager-resident relationship? And so I think when I think about the cultural question, for me, that's a big piece of what I'm thinking about, is how to effectively identify the cooperative values are not new or particularly special. They're the values that have allowed human societies to exist. And so, but they take a different form and they use a different language in each culture and in each subculture of that culture. So I think it's really a matter of making sure that there is that translation element, that there's a way to say, your community holds these values, let's bring these values into a different context in order to make our lives better.
And can I sneak in?
Yeah,
I want to also say, not just you have the values, you have the lived experience of being cooperators.
Yes,
You have
thank you.
done it. You have done it. So what I give you is returning to you and refining what you already have, not just the values, but the practical skill set. Because what happens is that we have convinced people that those people over there with the degrees and the professional experience have the skills to have cooperative businesses. But you yourself, you don't know anything about this. But we've got to reverse the narrative. You have the most experience, the most understanding about being cooperative. Those other people know how to be competitive, but you know how to be cooperative, and you know how to take $1 and take 15 cents and make $1, which is what cooperatives do. They're resourceful, right? So anyway, I just want to say that they have the skills and the intrinsic ability based on their structured position to be successful cooperators. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I know there are a few more questions. What we'll do now is we'll wrap up the formal part of our presentation, and then anybody who'd like to stick around, we can continue to have Q&A if our panelists can stick around as well. Awesome. So we'll just go to the next slide. And the next one after that. Great. So we just want to provide y'all here with some more information around what it means to spot a potential business for, suitable for conversion. So take it away, Doug.
Yeah, thanks. So in terms of next steps, we would like to just encourage everybody who's listening and those that you can influence to be on the lookout for businesses in your community that could be candidates for conversion. In the cooperative world and the cooperative development world, we've kind of dubbed this as sort of what's called the silver tsunami. Some statistics to share, and that is that baby boomers own almost half the privately held businesses in the US. Really, it's the small businesses that provide the jobs in our country. And also, 6 out of 10 business owners plan to sell their business in the next decade. So we're really wanting to encourage, as you're out in your community, engaging with local businesses, to sort of look for some candidates that you could refer to ACBA for help, or other organizations that can provide help in becoming a cooperative. And none of these things are total requirements, but they're all important. For example, a business owner that wants to retire or is otherwise looking for an exit strategy. As I said, business owners are thinking about how they might have a legacy in their business, but they're not wanting it to go away or move to another community. Again, a manageable size, 20 to 80, 200 employees. There are examples of large employee owned cooperatives, but again, the scale can prove to be a challenge. So small and medium-sized businesses are really the sweet spot. Of course, we're looking for a business that is really established in its community and profitable, name recognition, so a business that might have some specialized knowledge that the community doesn't want to lose. There's a great example, I think maybe in Massachusetts, of a business that provided glass blowing for medical devices that was just sort of like irreplaceable, and the business owner wanted to retire. So that was an example of a business that was really critical, and it converted to a worker co-op. So that's another place to look, for a great candidate. Really looking at it from the worker and employee perspective, where there is an established culture of collaboration, of wealth building, of a real sense of shared gain and loss in the business. That is not necessarily common, but it's a great ingredient that could really provide an avenue for success to a conversion to a cooperative. So again, that's a place to really look. And as Carol mentioned earlier, some of the business types that are really primed for this type of conversion: the trades, landscaping, electricians, plumbers, food service, grocery stores, small scale food retail, professional services like architects, engineers, accountants, and also healthcare and childcare companies. So really, we're challenging those listening, the people that you have influence over, to really get out in your community as you're able to. Now, once we put this pandemic in the history books, to really look for places and businesses that we could help convert to a cooperative. So that's one next step for those of you who are here and listening. If you could go to the next slide, please. And great. We're also wanting you to get involved with ACBA. So one easy way is to get on our mailing list, follow us on social media. We have some really exciting plans coming up for 2021. We would love for you to know about them. And we'd love for you to be involved as much as you're able to. We have committees, as have been mentioned along the way in our presentation. And here in the slide, you can see who to contact and next meetings that are scheduled for some of those committees. Again, this presentation is being put on by the Education, Training, and Information Committee, P5, the Principle 5 of the Cooperative Principles, Education, Training, and Information. So you have that committee to thank for this presentation, but we also have a couple other committees that you might be interested in. And finally, we are a volunteer board, and we have a board election coming up next month. We have some open seats. We would love any person who is a member of one of our, or any community member to consider running for the board, and certainly any owner of one of our member organizations to join us on the board and help with our work. And finally, not listed here, of course, is to tell your city council member, tell your representatives, tell your state senators. The Texas legislature is coming into session in a couple of months. We would encourage you to let them know that cooperatives are something that we want them to put their efforts behind. So those are some next steps and what next for those listening here. That's it. And I guess we could go back to questions now, or Carol, you can take it.
I think we'll just let you know that, thank you so much, Doug. Yeah, we look forward to hearing from y'all and hope y'all keep in touch with us. If you go to the next slide, again, we just want to remind you to support our work financially if you are so able. Join our monthly donor club, the Cooperation Club, get these sweet posters, tell everyone you know about the cooperative principles. We would really, really appreciate that. It helps us do what we're doing today. And the next slide has some contact information for each of our panelists, just in case you're looking for that. I know it went in the chat, and yes, we will share out this recording, absolutely, and I'll share out the slides as well. So you'll have this information for your reference. And finally, we just want to thank everyone for coming. Next slide, please. These are all the different ways you can keep in touch with us. So please do follow us on the platform of your choice. And we really hope to hear from you soon. And like I said, if there are further questions, we can stick around for a couple minutes. Can't take up too much of these lovely panelists' time, but that wraps up our formal presentation. Thank you so much for being here. All right, well, panelists, I think there's a couple more questions for those sticking around. So I'm going to just quickly address one of the questions that came up around what would the ACBA recommend to other communities wanting to utilize the same kind of co-op conversion research. Did we hire a consultant? Is this research relatively easy to do? Short answer is yes, we hired a research consultant, some local researchers here in Austin who did the conversions project for us and the technical assistance project for us. So that may be a recommended route. We got funding from the Cooperative Development Foundation to help us put on workshops as well as do the research reports. They're a very supportive organization for any kind of research and education in this space. So we're really grateful for them, and you may want to check them out as well. CDF is their acronym. And I would say certainly, you can go into more depth in terms of how easy the research is to do. We use some online economic databases to get some of the research around existing businesses. That information is relatively easy to come by. But of course, the more you tailor it, the more interviews you do. We did some interviews with local cooperators. That can take some time. So definitely recommend getting some financial support for those kind of projects. And then another question we had was, and I'll open this up to anyone on the panel, would be, what is the place of public-private partnerships in the incubator stage in terms of creating cooperative incubators? And what are any common rebuttals that investors have in terms of funding cooperative conversions? Feel free to tackle any part of that question.
I'll just tackle that. Even with the 2 cooperatives that we have developed, my nonprofit was part of seeding those. And so I came in as a cooperator and used dollars from my nonprofit as investment shares in one of the cooperatives. And then also we have provided no interest loans when necessary. So it's an extension of our work as a nonprofit, right? I think it was Annalise's point about getting dollars to people, right? And so we just made in our nonprofit, the Research Institute, the cooperative development as one of our projects. So the board, committed to that. This is the work. This fulfills our mission of strengthening communities, right? Creating knowledge to build communities, which is our mission. And so it's very consistent. And so that way they can also, as board members, based on the bylaws, right? One cooperative did not include non-workers as board members, but the second cooperative did, because people do have experiences and knowledge and they can invest in the cooperative. And of course, cooperatives take donations. They're not tax deductible. But again, you can give to a nonprofit that has a relationship with a cooperative, and then that will allow the nonprofit to use funds for cooperatives. So I think there are a number of ways to just be creative, but the board structure allows sometimes for people who are really passionate about cooperatives to participate. I think you have to be careful because you then don't want to disempower or take power away from the workers, but a good mix of, workers, non-workers in the cooperative business allows you to share those resources, tangible and non-tangible resources such as knowledge and experience.
I can add one extra just piece of information regarding kind of investment capital and what objections might come from investors in terms of investing in cooperatives. And it's really more than anything, a structural limitation of cooperatives for good reasons. But in the state of Texas, by law, so basically the only investment vehicle available to cooperatives is preferred shares. It doesn't come with any voting rights. Because of one member, one vote, because of our commitment to democracy, we're really not a good prospect for any kind of investment capital. Anybody who's going to invest is going to have a limited return. By law in Texas, it's limited to 8%. And most venture capital is interested in a much higher rate of return, especially in real estate. Like, they would laugh at you for 8%. And then because it doesn't come with any rights, any voting rights, any control, I think folks who invest large amounts of money in businesses are typically used to having a lot more say. Having worked with my clients who have venture capital, boy howdy, those folks want to have a lot of say. And, appropriately, that's not possible in a cooperative. So it creates this barrier to equity investments in cooperatives. It's really got to be a very certain kind of mission investor that would do that, which is not a problem for smaller cooperatives. But if you're trying to finance a very large deal or something that involves land, I think that can prove to be a barrier from time to time.
Thank you for both of your insights on this question. We have another question.
I just want to I think so. It's a limited, right? If people's express interest is financial return, then this is not the model for them. And we have to stop trying to convince people who don't share our values to play with us. Like, and the idea that we've got to figure out how to identify people who are ideologically aligned with what we're doing. And then we got to find a way to really put our resources together. And that may mean a limited in growth, right? I think, again, one of the problems is that in the capitalist market, size means everything. And we're not successful if we are not at this size. We may need to reorient ourselves around success, right? If success is meeting the need. So when we just keep our residents working, we are successful. So we're not thinking about how many projects we have or how much money's in the bank. Our goal every month or every week is to keep money in the pockets of our workers, right? And so I think we just need to think about that and think about initiatives, project business ideas that allow us to operate at our level until once we get a sector, once we really get a cooperative sector economy going, then we'll have enough resources among the cooperatives to create that fund. If we have enough, true, credit unions that should be funding cooperatives and not just funding people to buy cars, I'm just saying, then we would then have the resources among ourselves. So I think we need to really maybe lean in on some of our credit unions and ask them, are you with us or are you not, right? Because you're not operating in the true spirit of cooperation because we're cooperatives and where's your funding for us, right? I think we need to lean in. And my final thing is we got to stop letting people use the kind of framework of the cooperative, like a credit union, when they're not really have the identity and the structure and the systems and the values. They need to get out of our community and go and be with the community that they really want to be with intellectually, right? And I really mean that because so often the resources are there, but people are not operating in line with the identity of cooperatives. And so I think we need to ask ourselves, what resources do we have among ourselves that can be pulled together, like money circles, like the way working class people have lived all the time, to be able to fund some of these initiatives of new cooperatives.
Yeah,
I
I've
just
got
have
two.
Go ahead,
Let's
Ryan.
hear from Ryan and then Annalise on this. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I just got two really quick points about financing. And first, I think just kind of echoing some of the earlier comments about, I think really developing relationships with like social impact investors is something that we should do more of. But I think there is an argument to be made for traditional investors that, co-ops are worth investing in at a lower rate than potentially they might think of for the sector. And I think that to get that, I think we need to show that they're lower risk, that you're less likely to see a failure in a co-op. And there has been some work done on that. I remember there was some work after the Great Recession that cooperatives tended to survive at higher rates. And so I think if we can document like just, less risky, it might not be better performance, but like not losing money is like a great way to show better performance. So I think those are the two different strategies that I would recommend for seeking investment.
And I just wanted to highlight another, it's kind of an illustrative challenge that helps to like get a picture of why advocacy on behalf of co-ops is so important. I've worked with several co-ops who are trying to access the economic injury disaster loan funding through the Small Business Administration this year because of COVID. And those funds are explicitly, co-ops are eligible for those funds. However, cooperative ownership, typically you don't have a majority owner. You often, if your business has more than 3 people, which co-ops do, you don't have anyone that owns 51% or more of the business. You often don't have anyone who owns 20% or more of the business. And so even though co-ops are eligible, there's this road bump that they hit in all of these standard types of loan applications because they just want the name and social security number of your people that own 20% or more of the business. And the co-ops are like, well, that doesn't exist at our business. And the people who are trying to process the applications are throwing up their hands. They don't know what to do, and the co-ops don't know what to do. And so, you know, the national level co-op associations like the National Cooperative Business Association, who has ties in Washington and relationships at the SBA, has helped with this particular program to smooth that out. But it's just this piece of like, co-ops aren't on the form. The co-op business model isn't accounted for in the standard ways that loans are conceived of in banks and credit unions. And so that's the kind of advocacy that we need to do, is really building a systemic understanding of co-ops as a legitimate business model that just should be included as an option in order to help make those connections. Because it's not that they don't want to fund co-ops necessarily, that might be the case sometimes, but that they have no way to process that in their system.
Andy, did you want to, I saw your comment in the chat, if you wanted to just talk about your comment.
Oh, I could actually, I was typing another comment just to say what Annalise is saying. Yes, that's a huge problem. And I've had a fair bit of success dealing with that. So if anybody is having those troubles and wants to talk strategy, feel free to reach out, because I think I figured out how to usually successfully communicate with folks who don't understand co-ops. But if you want me to talk about my comment, I can. I just assumed we wouldn't get to that question, so.
Yeah, I think maybe we'll just have your final comment on this topic, and then we'll wrap up since we're approaching 1 o'clock.
My final comment on Beth's question?
Yeah, and I think that the conversation
Okay.
in response to the most recent question is really, you know, circled around this idea of getting more capital in the hands of the worker owners, and what that could look like locally.
Yeah. So the question that Carol's referring to, it was asked in the chat, and it was, does anyone know how we would start if we wanted to found a Texas-specific cooperative development fund like Shared Capital? Shared Capital being a nationwide revolving loan fund. It's a CDFI, and it specifically works with cooperatives. And actually, they're part of the Workers to Owners Collaborative, which is financing nationally a lot of these conversions at the time. And so basically, just in terms of starting one, so Shared Capital is actually one of my clients. I know a fair bit of how they operate. And what I have really learned is that it is a very high level of technical knowledge and infrastructure that is necessary to run a loan fund, and that loan funds can have more impact once they get to that 20 million mark, which is what Shared Capital is aiming at right this moment. And I think Capital Impact Partners might already be there and things like that. And so rather than starting a separate fund, what I would really encourage us to think about doing is partnering with an existing, culturally appropriate, like understands cooperatives as all variety of communities, partner with them. They know what they're doing. But what we can do locally is, one, raise capital to capitalize a fund that they manage that is specifically for serving Texas cooperatives. They already have these kinds of partnerships with other entities. And then the other thing that we could do, and it doesn't have to, I'm not pitching anyone in particular, but find a fund, they already know what they're doing. And then the other thing is that we could then be capitalizing that fund and then doing the outreach to borrowers to find new businesses, to find those opportunities and connect them to the loan funds, who they themselves do this technical assistance work. They help people get to being loan ready. They do technical assistance through the life of the loan. But like, if we can kind of find that capital, and I'll tell you right now, there's plenty of money in the cooperative landscape right now that needs an investment outlet that they feel good about. And we could build that and connect folks to the folks who have the technical skills to run that kind of fund.
Absolutely. And I'm so excited to see how, you know, what we've talked about today, how we can carry it forward and keep working together. I feel like we're just making connections even stronger and bringing new people in. So this is really exciting work. I really want to thank y'all for being here again today. Oh, and just to get to one more question that was in the chat from Jeanette, in terms of support for worker self-directed nonprofit, I'm gonna assume Asada and Annalise, you might be the best folks to refer to on this call. If that sounds good. So for Jeanette, if you're still here, Annalise or Asada, I think would be good bets for reaching out to. And they've put their contact info in the chat. And also I want to highlight what Mark Birkenstock has said in terms of chatting more about communicating about the value of cooperatives in our communities and supporting cooperative development. Sounds like getting in touch with him would be a good idea as well. So again, thank you so much for being here. Please do keep in touch with us, and we will be putting on other events in the future. So have a great rest of your day, y'all.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.